So, of course, zoning, remember there's a lot of vocab in the zoning. Zoning is the map of here's R1, R2, AR, C1, C2, mixed use. There's no one size fits all. No, you don't need to know any of the R1s, R2s. It doesn't matter because they're all different. But you do need to know that within those, there's what we call ordinances, the rules for each of those. Nathan, typically they have tried to in the past, but because you can fight them in court for how much money they're going to give you, they've typically tried to be a little over just lately because they don't want to end up in court and have to deal with you. So, plus there's plenty of eminent domain attorneys that you should listen. I'm going to tell you some advice because I was talking to somebody about this the other day. If you ever have the government come and offer you money for a piece of property that they're taking by way of eminent domain, your very first phone call should be an eminent domain attorney. Because there was an example, and I'm not even kidding, somebody told me where they were offered like $50,000 and they called an eminent domain attorney and they got like $650,000. So worth it. Even if you have to pay like 20% to that attorney, worth it.
And that's a Mark Spade lowball right there.
that is. So, I mean, there's some subjectivity to what that potential use of that land could have been and things like that. So that's why you definitely want to call one. Anyway, what you got, Robert?
Just quick, the eminent domain is the right. What was the actual act? Was it reclamation?
Condemnation. Condemnation. There you go. Kashana put it in the chat right there. Condemnation. So remember with zoning is all the different places that, you know, they want to see certain things. Ordinances are the rules within. You can build this, you can't build this, you can build this, you can't build this. And so we had a lot of vocab and things that went into the zoning. Okay. A legal conforming use, right? Meaning you're doing things the right way and you're meeting the zoning. That's a conforming use. A non-conforming use means you're not meeting the zoning. And that could be illegal or illegal depending. An illegal non-conforming use means you just didn't follow the rules. You bought a residential property, you built a commercial building. That's an illegal non-conforming use. The government come and charge you criminally because you're in violation of public land use controls, the law. A legal non-conforming use is when you are grandfathered in. You bought a commercial property, you built a commercial building, and then the government changed the zoning to residential. They're not going to make you stop operating. They're going to say, well, hey, it's residential now, but you were here already. You can continue to operate as a legal non-conforming use. Can it go on maybe indefinitely? Possibly. But the whole premise is they would eventually want you to conform. So if you try to apply for a building permit to add your new parking lots, they're going to say no. Because they're like, this is residential now. We're not going to approve a commercial permit. But as long as you're following the rules, you know, you can keep operating as a legal non-conforming use. But typically what they state is, okay, well, the property burns down. You can't rebuild it. Things like that. Of course, variance, folks, let me word of caution here. A lot of students mess up. If I said that you purchased a piece of residential property and you wanted to build a commercial building, what would you have to do in order to be able to legally build a commercial building on a property that is currently a residential zoning? There you go, Robert. That is rezoning, folks. It's not a variance. So often students are like, oh, a variance. No. A variance is not completely contradicting the zoning. A variance is asking for permission to ignore one tiny aspect. Like instead of operating on a 15-foot setback, let me do a 10-foot setback because of some undue hardship. So a variance would be, I got a residential piece of property. I'm building a residential building. It says that I can't build within 15 feet of the setbacks. I'm asking if I can build within 10 feet. That'd be a variance. Asking permission to ignore one small piece. Not completely contradict the zoning. If you want to completely contradict it, it's rezoning. You would have to go through the channels, go through the motions to change it from residential to commercial to be able to do this. Big companies do this all the time. But it's called rezoning. Now, there is also this special use permit, also called a conditional use permit. That's not rezoning. It's just that under certain circumstances, it will approve certain things with conditions, like approving a church in residential, so long as there's not more than 3 per 4 miles or whatever like that. So it's not specifically named as okay. It's not specifically named as not okay. So you could apply for a special use permit for certain things that could be benefit to residential schools, churches, and certain criteria. Didn't change the zoning though. It's not that like, oh yeah, now this is church zoning. No, still residential zoning, but we gave you permission to build this. Who remembers what's an overlay district? There you go, Recta. Two different types of zoning overlapping each other. So residential and floodplain designation zoning at the same time. So you can build residential, but it has to be on stilts. Or, for example, I think like the next one, historic preservation, residential and also historic preservation zoning overlaying each other. Or commercial and aesthetic zoning that says they all have to look like log cabins in the mountains. Okay? You can have multiple types of zoning hyperimposed on each other, overlapping each other. Aesthetic zoning has to look a certain way. Spot zoning is when you're rezoning an itty bitty little piece. Not automatically illegal, but more often than not probably is. Because if it's not for the greater good, it shows favoritism. It can be overturned in courts. Cluster zoning, cul-de-sacs. Homes are close together, meaning there's more green space, more land. Nathan says, does Cary have aesthetic zoning? Yeah, not as strict as some areas that are touristy, but they do have an aesthetic zoning in some areas for sure. Yeah, a lot of break. And then, of course, buffer zone breaks apart two different other types of zoning that contradict. So, like commercial or industrial with like residential. You may have like a greenway, a parkway, something that kind of just eases that transition. So a lot of that's just that vocab. One of the big things students get screwed up on, this one right here, subdivision regulations. Not confusing those with restrictive covenants. Subdivision regulations are a public land use control. The government gets to decide whether or not you can build a subdivision. What's the definition of a subdivision? When you are subdividing into two or more lots with the intent to build, sell, or develop. You cannot build the subdivision until you have preliminary plat approval. You have to go and say, this is what I'd like to build. And if the planning board approves it, that's called preliminary plat approval. Once you have that, you can obviously start developing it, and you can start marketing it and contracting on the lots after preliminary plat approval. You cannot close on the lots or, for example, transfer the lots to somebody else until the final plat map has been recorded. The final plat map gets recorded at the Register of Deeds. The preliminary plat approval is just at the planning board level. So you can market and contract at preliminary approval, but you cannot close on or transfer until the final plat map has been recorded. Robert says approval from the state or the county. The county or the city, depending on who has jurisdiction for the project. If it's in the city limits, it'd be planning board approval from the city. If it's not within the city limits, it'd be from the county. Good question. Talked about the private land use control enforcement. Yeah. Next category here, property taxation and insurance. Word of caution, remember, you're going to get test questions, obviously, on taxation, insurance, and everything on the state level. So this is state exam categories. Don't get confused, though, because there are math questions dealing with taxes. Those are national categories. So don't think that, like, you're not going to see taxes on national. You are. But there are, of course, very specific things. So like North Carolina, we've got the Machinery Act, which we said gives the power to the municipalities to levy taxes on real property for local, right? Cities, counties, townships get the taxes. It's what we call ad valorem, which stands for assessed value tax. So in North Carolina, we're charging you a per 100 tax rate, and that's getting charged based on 100% of your assessed value. Okay, we use 100%. Remember, I taught you very early on, some states will use what's called an equalization factor. So they'll say something like, oh, well, we're charging you based on 80% of the market price, like what it last sold for. We're going to charge you 80% of that. That's what your tax is going to be based on. North Carolina, we just charge you 100% based on 100% of your assessed value based on your tax rate. So the per 100 rate is what we use. Other states do use the mill rate. Per 100, remember if I say $1.15 per 100, what is that stating? You owe $1.15 per $100 worth of assessed value. A mill rate is just per 1,000. So if I say 17 mills, that is $17 per $1,000 worth of assessed value. And you do need to be able to convert, per 100 to mills, mills to per 100, or mills to per dollar. And so think about it in the calculator. Remember I told you this. If you are moving 100 to 1,000 in a calculator, it's times 10. So a per 100 rate times 10 moves it to a mill rate. If you're looking at a mill rate in the calculator, divide by 1,000 to move it to a per dollar rate. So it's being able to make these adjustments and do these calculations. And as we said, there's no math, even though it says calculations are level 3. There's no math on the state portion. It's all on the national. So you will get these questions on the national. Of course, there's a Machinery Act. Folks, the other thing, you got to be very careful of language, okay? Because I know this is confusing. How often does North Carolina have to reevaluate the tax values? Have to.
Every 8 years.
Every 8 years. So you have to understand that while 8 years, 8's a bigger number than 4. 8 years, there you go, Mark. I like that you put that. 8 years minimum. I had a student that just could not wrap their brain around the word minimum. Well, 4 is smaller than 8. But the minimum frequency that we can do it is every 8 years. Does that make sense for everybody? What's the maximum frequency we can do it? There you go. 4 years. We can do a horizontal reassessment every 4 years, meaning across the board. The entire municipality can reevaluate it every 4 years, and they have been. We legally have to do it at minimum every 8 years. At most, we can do it every 4 years. But the other thing you got to be aware of, don't confuse this on the test. How often does the tax rate change?
Can change any number of times, right? Or
Every stinking year. The tax rate can and does change every year. So if I'm asking the question, what's the minimum that the reappraisal has to happen? 8 years. What's the maximum that the reappraisal can happen? 4 years. How often can the tax rate change? Every year. Do you see the differentiations in questions? And it will eat you alive if you're not paying attention, because I promise you, on all 3 of those types of questions, 1 year, 4 years, and 8 years are all options. Ruthless. Of course, in North Carolina, we say the tax liens are allegedly attached to the property. Robert says it can change more than once in a year. No, they're not. They're just going to set it at one time in the year, right? They're not changing the tax rate in the middle of the year. So this is why. So remember, tax lien is said to be on your property as of January 1. Now, it's an unrecorded lien. They're not going to record a document when it's not delinquent yet. But we say that you have a tax lien on your property as of January 1. But we don't consider taxes due and payable until what date in North Carolina?
September.
September 1st. And the reason is we don't set the annual tax rate until July 1. So they're only setting it once a year. But it gets set by July 1. So they're not doing it multiple times. So realistically, if we're closing before July 1, we don't even know what the actual tax bill is. We always just actually legally base it on the previous year. That's all we can do. Because it could change. Not by a lot, probably, but it could. Now, don't confuse this, though. When you're calculating tax prorations, you're not prorating with September 1. The only thing September 1 is trigger whether or not the tax bill is considered due and payable. So if we're closing before September 1, it's not due and payable yet. But remember what I told you about the math questions. Do what the question says and nobody gets hurt. If we say that the seller has paid the tax bill already on January 3rd, freaking do the math that way. Okay? I'm telling you, the national portion of the test doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the math piece. So, tax lien is attached to the property January 1. July 1st, we set the tax rate. They're considered due and payable on September 1. And as long as you pay anywhere between September 1 and January 5th of the following year, it's on time. As of January 6th, it's delinquent. And once it gets delinquent, that's when they would typically record tax liens against the property. And remember, real property tax liens, highest priority no matter when they were recorded. Excise tax, very different than real property taxes. Excise tax is called revenue stamps. It's also called transfer tax. Who defaults to paying the excise tax in North Carolina? Seller. Excise tax is a seller debit. Remember, it is $1 for every $500 worth of purchase price, and there is never any change. If there's so much as 1 penny, go up to the next dollar. They never forgive it. Remember, the government ain't got no sense. They don't want none.
And you round up, always round up.
Always round up. You never round down. Okay, you can't forgive and forget it. So, I mean, if it's so much as a penny, if it's $500 and 1 penny, the answer is 501. Always round up. Now, there's a kind of a separate insurance section. We've talked about insurance a little bit. You could see these terms, but you see this as a level 1: insurance, insured, insurer, premiums, endorsements, exclusions. We don't need to go into any of this into in depth. This, though, I told you, absolutely. Okay, I showed you these on the slides. HO3, minimum homeowners insurance coverage required by lender when you have a loan on the property. HO4 is a renter's policy. Condominium, HO6. You absolutely need to know those, bar none. Of course, flood insurance not automatically required just because you're in a floodplain, just like insurance is not. If any other property is located in a floodplain and you got a mortgage, yeah, you're going to have flood insurance. Of course, there is the NFIP and FEMA that come into play here. Floodplains are a material fact. We've talked about this. Broker's responsibility dealing with insurances. Remember, unoccupied, not going to be insurable. Vacant. Unoccupied is limited. Vacant is the one that's uninsurable because there's nobody in there. Unoccupied, it would just depend. Could have insurances, could be dropped depending. The earlier late possession, we really have an obligation for making sure that they have adequate insurance throughout. Do not advise the seller to terminate insurance on the day of closing. Wait till long after it's been recorded, and then we would drop the insurance. We don't want to do that because if closing gets moved, they don't have insurance. So we do that after the fact. If you have a buyer possession before closing or seller possession after closing is negotiated, whoever is the tenant needs renter's insurance. Whoever is the landlord needs landlord insurance. That's part of due diligence, making sure you get insurance, floodplains, all that stuff. We just talked about this section, the income taxation piece, not heavily testable, but remember, certain expenses along with home ownership are tax deductible. Interest on first and second mortgages, discount points, prepayment penalties, origination fees in the year that they're paid, real property taxes every year that they're paid. If your house is paid off, the only thing that you really have is that's tax deductible at that point is your real property taxes each year are tax deductible. We just talked about the taxation of capital gains. Told you that exemption up to $250,000 if you've lived there for 2 out of the last 5 years. As an individual, up to $500,000 as a married couple. Of course, you got to know the amount realized, which is what you sold it for, minus applicable closing costs. And then you're going to subtract out your either cost basis or adjusted basis, depending. Because if you didn't do any capital improvements, it's just your cost basis, what you bought it for plus applicable closing costs. If you did do capital improvements, cost basis plus your capital improvements is your adjusted basis. And we use that to calculate your amount realized, your capital gain or your capital loss. No math on this anymore. Okay, you see that right there. There's no math calculations on this topic anymore, so we didn't focus on that. We had a quick mention of these, right? Special tax treatment things. Property disclosures and environmental issues, national exam category. Obviously, a lot of moving pieces in this section. We've said throughout the class that, especially when we're talking about those land use controls, we need to make sure that we have the conversations with our clients. Hey, I know you like this property. It's zoned residential. You need a commercial building. So this isn't going to work. So we need to advise them. Does the zoning match what they need to do? Does the restrictive covenants match what they need to do? Are they going to have to potentially look at rezoning it? So we need to have these conversations. We don't ever, be very careful. We're not ever interpreting anything legal for them. Don't ever answer it that way on the test. We cannot interpret covenants for them. We cannot interpret zoning laws for them, but we should advise them on base things and have them consult an attorney where applicable for these types of things. We already talked about discovering red flag situations, material facts, cracks, things that don't line up with what we're seeing, major discrepancies with square footage, things that would make us think that it's flooded, like silt on the side of the house or standing water in the house or, mildewy smells, all these things. rezoning, highway planning, development. Of course, some of the environmental things that you're going to see thrown at you. Underground storage tanks. Remember the biggest thing from this? If there's contamination, the person who owns the home is liable for the contamination, even if they're not the ones that installed the underground storage tank. Always recommend to get an inspector to figure out if there is one, and or if there's any contamination. What you got, Mark?
So in regards to just any of this information, say something was rezoned to be commercial, is there a specific place where you find all this information, or is this just a bunch of research that you have to do?
There's a bunch of research that you have to do. The short answer is the planning board. I mean, the thing is, all it takes is us picking up the phone and calling somebody at the planning board and saying, hey, this property, what's it currently zoned? Is there any potential rezoning? Is there, any minutes from meetings? The government employees. So it is research, but it's really not that hard to find once you get used to doing the research. Yeah. Property sold as remember, even if a property, and I don't know if this is going to come up on the test, if the property was being deemed as being sold as is, that doesn't change anything with our disclosure laws, right? We as real estate brokers always have to disclose material facts regardless of whether the seller wants to make any repairs in any way, shape, or form. And technically the 2T says that the property is being sold in its current condition. So even our contract states that it's as is. Can we negotiate repairs? Yes. Are we required to? No. When should we get the repair negotiations done by if we're doing them? Prior to due diligence to protect our client's earnest money. Environmental things. Remember, the lead-based paint's the most testable. Properties built prior to 1978 have to give this disclosure. I do know or I don't know. I have reports. I don't have reports. And then the buyer agent has to give the buyer the lead in your home pamphlet from the Environmental Protection Agency. Is there a requirement to test? No. Is there a requirement to remediate? No. Can the buyer do a test? Do they have to be given a 10-day assessment period if they want it? Yes. That's typically happening in their due diligence period in North Carolina. So making sure that we understand that one prior to 1978. Asbestos, not dangerous in and of itself, becomes dangerous when it's friable. That's the particulates getting in the air. What is the preferred method of remediation? Encapsulation. That second option right there. Can you remove it? Yes. It's not the preferred method of dealing with it because it's very costly. Has to be fully saturated. Has to go to a special landfill. So encapsulation is the preferred method of dealing with asbestos. Is radon in and of itself a material fact? No. What would make it a material fact?
Above a certain level, I think 4.
There you go. 4 picocuries per liter or higher. Colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. The only way to know if you have an issue is a test. Mold in and of itself, not a material fact either. Toxic mold, high concentrations of mold, those would be material facts. Of course, other miscellaneous things. Groundwater contamination could happen from a lot of different factors. Chemicals, underground storage tanks, petroleum fuel sources, E. coli, a lot of things like that. When we're dealing with waste disposal, obviously septic tanks and sewers are both legally approved waste disposal systems. What is considered straight piping is illegal, which is where all your wastewater just dumps into the yard or a hole or whatever. That's illegal. No straight piping. That's not allowed. I have heard that there is a lot more of this on the state licensing exam. CERCLA, remember we mentioned briefly when we talked about environmental, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act. It was also known as the Superfund because there was grant monies to help clean up this stuff. Grant monies ran out for things like underground storage tanks. And understand, too, that when we're dealing with sites that have been deemed a contaminated waste site by CERCLA, that is typically a material fact for life. Okay, underground storage tanks can sometimes be remediated if they leak because you can remove that. But toxic waste sites, material fact for life. Okay, material fact for life. Material fact for life. Oh Lord, this one. I'm gonna be completely honest. I think I'm just gonna aside from teaching, I'm just gonna spend the next 2 weeks not talking. I feel like I just been talking so much in these classes. Because we got these long days and it just keeps on going. Ugh. My brain hurts. What you got, Robert?
might be a little bit specific, but as far as material facts for toxic waste for life, I know where I'm at. There used to be I think it wasn't nuclear triggers.
Oh God, I know what you're talking about.
When I'm here in Colorado in this tiny little town, and I think they were just maybe refining, but there's a whole new neighborhood by a golf course where my buddy lives, and I think it was maybe 20 years ago, like literally almost like 25% of the neighborhood died of cancer, and so it was like 100 plus people ended up dying from this, and they built a whole new water treatment. It was from the water, and they built a new water treatment plant for that neighborhood. So theoretically, no more cancer from the groundwater. They were all using wells. Since they built that water treatment plant, they are now all on city water. Is that still like a material fact for life that it was contaminated with radioactive bullshit?
I mean, if I was a real estate agent in that area, I would probably still disclose that it was a thing. But that's going to be too oddly of a specific scenario on the test. I would probably still disclose it though.
Like them building the new water treatment plant did not take away the lifetime material effect.
Yeah, that I would say. I mean, obviously, if they're not getting that water contamination anymore, it's not really a concern, but I would still disclose it personally.
Yeah.
But I mean, it depends on state laws. State laws, it may be specific that they say this is not a required thing. Just like we say, we don't have to disclose haunted houses. Some states you do, right? In North Carolina, you don't have to disclose murder. Some states you do. Yeah. So who knows? Folks, remember, we had these conversations way back, and we did pretty good with these. These were kind of like the first, this sucks chapter, but it's really not all that terrible. We talked about, transfer of title and ownership and things like that. And so a couple different categories in this testable grouping, but let's start with the estates, okay? Estate is what level of ownership or interest you have in a property. Two main categories: freehold estates, estates of ownership, and non-freehold estates, also called leasehold estates, which are estates of lease, not of ownership. And so we started talking about the breakdown of category. Now remember, when we dealt with the freehold estates, one of the main testable pieces of this is whether or not it was an estate of inheritance. What does that mean?
Transferable.
Transferable by way of a what? A will. An estate of inheritance is something that can be transferred by way of a will. All of these can be transferred in life, but some of these are not estates of inheritance, meaning they cannot be transferred by way of a will, meaning when somebody dies. And so if you recall, every single freehold we talked about, every single freehold estate we talked about, with the exception of one, was an estate of inheritance. So your fee simple absolute is an estate of inheritance. Your fee simple defeasible, which is the broad category, estates of inheritance. Your life estates per ultra V are estates of inheritance. The only one that is not an estate of inheritance is your conventional life estate. Why is a conventional life estate not an estate of inheritance?
It depends on someone else's life.
A conventional life estate does not depend on somebody else's.
For as long as you're alive.
For as long as you're alive. So remember, a conventional life estate, the life tenant and the measuring life are the same person, which means it's yours so long as you are alive. Your will doesn't kick in until you die. And when you die, it's not yours anymore. So for that reason, the conventional life estate is the only one that is not an estate of inheritance. And so let's just really quickly recap these, okay? Fee simple, absolute, also just tested as fee simple, highest and best form of ownership. There is no limitations on time. There is no limitations on use, at least not powerful enough to screw you up. Are there restrictive covenants and land use controls? Yes, but that's not the point. Okay, neither one of those are going to lose your ownership. So fee simple, absolute, highest and best form of ownership, goes on forever, no restrictions that could mess up your ownership. Fee simple defeasible, also known as what? What is the other name for defeasible fee estates? Qualified, right there on the slide. Right.
That's right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that what, and yeah, I'm kind of helping you out here. I mean, it's up there. I'm just not going to tell you it's up there because I'm going to make you think and make you regurgitate it. That's the whole point. Qualified, folks. If I say qualified estate or qualified fee estate on the test, it's the same thing as defeasible. And so remember the key words there: defeat of defeasible, or you have to qualify. So you could defeat your ownership, or you have to qualify for ownership. So we have the categories within that, right? Fee simple determinable. This is your one allowable use. This is the only thing you can do. It's yours so long as you only ever use it as a horse farm. If you stop using it, it's not yours anymore. And then fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. Fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. Also sometimes it's called fee simple conditional or conditional fee. Do whatever you want so long as you don't do this one thing. And remember, if you stop, the grantor or the grantor's heirs could regain ownership through court. They don't get it automatically. It's not automatic reversion, but they could take it back by way of a court proceeding, right? Litigation. So then we have the life estates, okay? And I told you the life estate per ultra V grouped into the estate of inheritance. Per ultra V means what? For the life of another. You got a Ken right there, yeah. Per ultra V for the life of another. And so, Jonathan, you own this so long as Kashan is alive. Jonathan's life tenant. Kashan is the measuring life. Does Kashana have any ownership interest in this property? No. Kashana is a unit of measure. And so Jonathan will own it until Kashana kicks the bucket. And because that's the way this is structured, this could be in a state of inheritance. If Jonathan kicks the bucket, but Kashana's alive, it's still legally Jonathan's to own. So he could leave it to his kids. And how long would his kids own it for? There you go. Kashana says until I know. Listen, that's the weirdest section I have to teach because I have to start killing people left here. I'm like the Oprah Winfrey and the Grim Reaper combined. You get killed today, and you get killed today, right? It's just real dark on the days that we teach this class. Instead of handing out gifts, I'm handing out deaths. You died, then you died, then you died. Just so you can understand these concepts. I promise I don't enjoy fictitiously killing y'all. I promise. So if that was the case, right, you could will it because it's per ultra V. And then remember, too, when we're dealing with life estates, we know they're going to end. What's being restricted is time. You're going to own it for exactly the life of either you or somebody else, depending on which one we're talking about. So what happens when they end? There's two options. What happens when a life estate ends?
It goes back to the original owner or to a remainder man.
There you go. If we don't name somebody for it to go to, which is called a remainder man, it's what we call a reversionary interest. It will go back to the grantor or the grantor's heirs if the grantor is dead. So I give the property to Jonathan. Jonathan, you own this so long as Kashan is alive. And that's all I state. I have not named a remainder man. Kashana dies. It's not Jonathan's to own anymore. Comes back to me. Automatic reversion if we don't state anything otherwise. Okay, that's the default. But if I say, Jonathan, you own this so long as Jonathan, you own this so long as Kashan is alive, and at the end of your life estate, Lisa gets it. Lisa's now the remainder man. So Kashana kicks the bucket. Jonathan, it's not yours anymore. Lisa gets it. So just make sure that you're paying attention to who the parties are. Don't confuse the remainder man with the measuring life. Okay, you can't do that. It'll throw you off real bad. So remember, the one that's not in a state of inheritance is the conventional life estate. Okay, the conventional life estate, you can't will it because when you die, it's not yours anymore. Can you sell these? Yes. Could you burden them? Yes. But who's going to want to buy them? The other thing is this term that I mentioned very briefly in that section called estovers. You're not allowed to clear cut like any resources on the property for straight profit since it's not yours forever. But you would be allowed to use resources on the property to help maintain for and pay the property. That's called estovers. So you could cut some timber to help pay for the property. That's okay. Not for profit, but to maintain the property. These other ones are level 1. I don't want to spend any time there. We got more important things to touch on. We talked about that recently. We just talked about these. Just remember, the non-freehold estates, also called leasehold estates, very straightforward. They're just how they end, really. Periodic tenancy, also called an estate from period to period. What does it have automatically? Renewal. It will automatically renew in some way, shape, or form unless you give the requisite notice of your intent to not renew. What about the estate for years? What makes that an estate for years?
District.
Start and end date.
Very specific start and end date. When it's done, it's done. Get out. Okay. An estate at will is just with permission, typically not associated with time, typically not associated with money. But folks, if we had a relationship where I said, stay here until you get back on your feet, and you're paying me every month you're here, it's still the best answer. While it's not typically associated with money, there's no time. Stay here until you don't. That's still an estate at will, even if you're paying me, right? But I think a lot of us would be like, well, I feel weird. Let me pay you something. So typically not associated with time, typically not associated with money. Estate at will is just with permission. Stay here until you get back on your feet. Stay here until your divorce is finalized. Stay until whatever. Until you finalize your lease on your other property. And then the estate itself, for instance, is a holdover tenant. You gained access one of these other legal ways, and then when your time was up, you didn't leave. Not a squatter. You didn't trespass. You just didn't leave when you were supposed to leave. Of course, we talked about this, as I told you when I was teaching it to you in the slides. Percentage lease. Look at it. Level 3. Level 3 means that's on the freaking test, folks. What is a percentage lease?
You get a percentage of the profit or the income
And
and the rent.
there you go. You got a base rent, plus you're paying some percentage of incomes or profits or proceeds as a tenant. Most common with what type of real estate leases?
Retail.
Retail. Stores. Because they're selling stuff. Of course, leases or contracts. Talked about the vocab here. Sole owner. Remember the conversations about sole owner versus concurrent ownership. Ownership in severalty means one. You got to know that on the test. If I say somebody owns something as an owner in severalty, you got to be able to tell me what that means. One owner. That's it. Just one person. Now, it could be one person. Could be one entity. Concurrent ownership means multiple owners. Okay, remember the 3 types of concurrent ownership: tenancy in common, joint tenancy, and tenancy by the entirety. Okay, first things first, tenancy in common for who? Who can have tenancy in common?
They have undivided shares. Tenancy.
They have undivided shares, but is there any restriction on who can have it? No. Zero restriction. Strangers could have tenancy in common. Best friends could have tenancy in common. Boyfriend and girlfriend. Doesn't matter, okay? Anybody can have it. So everybody can have tenancy in common. Undivided, meaning everybody's an owner. The shares don't have to be equal, but could be. And the key piece of this is when you die, what can you do with your share?
You can give it to whoever you want.
You can give it to whoever you want. You can will it. If you have 1/8 interest in something, you can will that 1/8 to somebody else. And if you got 2 kids that you will it to, they each have now 1/16. So you can will your share in tenants in common. This is the most common type of concurrent ownership. Joint tenancy. Who can have joint tenancy?
It's anyone, but you have to get in on the same time and have equal tenancy.
There you go. So joint tenancy, yet again, for anybody. Friends, acquaintances, doesn't matter. But as Jonathan said, it is required to have this unity of time, title, possession, and interest. You have to take title at the exact same time as everybody else. If 4 people bought a property as joint tenants and one person sold their share 3 years later, what would the new person come in as?
Tenant in common.
Tenant in common. Because they would lack that time, title, possession, and interest. So they would not be a joint tenant. They would not be part of the arrangement. Now, the other word of caution, if you're dealing with a national question, what did it categorize this section as? So yeah, this is national, but of course there's some state side to this too. If you're dealing with a national question, automatic right of survivorship. Right of survivorship means you cannot will your share in joint tenancy. So if we're giving you a national question, it's automatic. So if I say, such and such owns, 1/4 as joint tenant and they die, and on their will they state that it's going to go to their best friend who owns it, the other joint tenants, automatic. But in North Carolina, our deed has to state right of survivorship. So it says joint tenants with right of survivorship. This is from the Real Estate Commission syllabus right here. Automatic in states other than North Carolina, but we've got to have that language, which is why there's one review question in the online exam prep materials that states, it lacks rules of succession or something like that. In other words, what it's trying to tell you is it does not say with right of survivorship. And in North Carolina, if it lacks that language, it's going to be interpreted as tenancy in common. We'll let you will it because we can't do anything other than that in North Carolina. But you're going to be very careful. Now, because of the nature of joint tenancy and, how everybody is these owners and, when people can't agree in concurrent ownership, what do? We can agree to end this. If we can't agree, it's called a partition suit or a petition to partition. They get nasty because basically the government will come in and they'll say, or the courts will come in and say, okay, well, there's 4 of you. You can't come to an agreement, so I'm going to cut it into 4 pieces. Folks, if we're dealing with a big piece of property worth a lot of money and we cut it into 4 janky little pieces, you may have just destroyed the value. So it's sometimes better to agree, but is it always going to work out that way? No. And then tenancy by the entirety, who is that for?
Couples, married people.
Married persons only. Folks, listen to me, as silly as it sounds, it's a test question in some respects. Could a brother and sister have tenancy by the entirety? No. In all 50 states, it's illegal to marry your biological sibling. All of them. Thank God. So, brother and sister could have tenants in common. Brother and sister could have joint tenancy. Brother and sister could not have tenancy by the entirety. You have to be legally married at the time that you take title to the property. Automatic right of survivorship automatically equals shares, and unlike joint tenancy where you can sell your share off, this is non-severable. The only way to end tenancy by the entirety, death, divorce, mutual agreement. What you got, Robert?
I don't know. I don't think anything. I just confused myself with my notes, and I wrote a bunch of shit about condominiums in community space by tenancy in common.
Oh, no, you're not confusing yourself. Remember, when we talked about condominiums, we referred to them as a hybrid form of ownership. Why? Because you hold title to your airspace of your unit by yourself. But you are all said to be tenants in common of the common areas. Technically, you all kind of own the building together, even though there's an HOA. Why is that significant for condominiums, Robert? If your unit, remember what I told you, if you had a high-rise condominium and your unit was over here, a hurricane comes through and demolishes this piece, you're all getting a special assessment if the insurance money doesn't cover it, even though your unit didn't get hit because you all own the building together as tenants in common. So you're not confusing yourself. This tenancy in common comes up again in condominium ownership.
No, that's perfect. I'm now back to being not confused.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's why you ask the questions, man. Like, that's the right thing to do. When you see these notes, you're like, well, hold on, I've confused myself. I can fix it. Let's talk through it. So that one, this is the common community. So actually, I can show you exactly what we're just talking about. Individual unit owners own undivided share of common elements, own as tenants in common with the right of partition. That's what you're thinking of right there. So you hold title to your individual airspace unit solely. And then, of course, unit owners all are said to be tenants in common with everything together. Okay, remember the other ones that came into conversation here? We talked about timeshares, which we just did, so I'm not going to really beat that in the ground again. We talked about co-ops. Remember, you hold personal property stocks in a company, and that gives you the right to a proprietary lease. That's the only thing you need to know. You don't even need an example. Okay? Co-ops, you own stocks, which gives you right to a lease. You don't own the real property. The company owns the real property. You own stocks in the company. Of course, the timeshare pieces we just talked about. Trusts, not really testable. Appurtenances. What is an appurtenance?
Something that runs with the land.
Nailed it. And so there are a lot of things that are appurtenances. Subsurface rights, water rights, air rights. Now, subsurface rights and air rights can be severed and sold off. Water rights cannot. Water rights are non-severable. So water rights cannot be retained when the property title is transferred. Air rights can. Subsurface rights can. Water rights can't. Of course, other things that were considered appurtenances, leases are appurtenances, covenants are appurtenances. So, right, some encumbrances are appurtenances, some appurtenances are encumbrances. They're not the same thing, though. So, good, bad, or otherwise, appurtenances run with the land. Some of the vocab, remember we talked about right of lateral support, meaning adjacent properties can't do anything that would mess up the structural integrity of your property. And then right of subjacent support, if you sell off the subsurface rights on your property, somebody comes to mine the oil or, fracking or whatever, they can't do it to an extent that would destroy the structural integrity of the rest of your property. And then, of course, remember with water rights, 2 broad categories, riparian, littoral. The best way to think about it, littoral is ocean crap. It's the best way to think about it. And so with riparian, we take it a step further. Navigable versus non-navigable. If it is a non-navigable body of water under riparian rights, what do we say about your ownership of the water?
Out to the center.
Yeah. You own into the water. So if it's a stream that runs this is how they love to test it. If it's a stream that runs along a property boundary, you each own halfway into that creek, into that stream, because those are non-navigable bodies of water. If it's a pond, you own it. You own the dirt underneath it. You own the water itself. If it is a navigable body of water, where does your ownership go to? Up to. That's it. There's a reason why you can go canoeing, kayaking, rafting, tubing in the Cape Fear and the Neuse River. And there's houses all along it. Those people own to the water's edge. But that's a public right-of-way. You are allowed to traverse the rivers. If you get out to take a leak, you're trespassing. But you own to the water's edge. And then when we're dealing with littoral, right? High tide, low tide. Things that are affected by the moon. So where is the ownership line for a property adjacent to a body of water that's affected by the tide?
High water mark?
Yep, the average high tide mark. It's called the mean high tide. And so everything below high tide and low tide is called your foreshore. This number 3 bullet point right here, that's all public. You can always access that. That belongs to the public, not to the individual property owner. I told you, you're really not going to see the prior appropriation, but I told you the 2 ways it's tested is the government owns the water, or in other words, whoever had first access to it, future access to water cannot impede the initial person's access. So somebody can't come upstream and dam it off where it messes up somebody downstream. Talked about these. Talked about that. Talked about that. Talked about that. Folks, let me remind you, okay? When you're dealing with deeds, we always record them in the real world. Yes, if I ask you when do we consider you the owner in North Carolina, it's when we recorded the deed. If I ask you when we give you the keys as the buyer in North Carolina, it's when we've recorded the deed. If I ask when your insurance kicks in, it's when you recorded the deed. But that being said, if I ask you, is a deed valid without being recorded? The answer is absolutely yes. There are 7 things that have to be present in order for a deed to be valid. Name the grantor and the grantee, adequate words of conveyance, accurate legal description, legal capacity of the grantor, meaning 18 sane and sober, signatures of the grantor, delivered and voluntarily accepted, has to be in writing. Now, the one that's not on this list, but I want to make sure that you still are aware that it does need to exist, because I don't know why sometimes we have it on, sometimes we'd have it off. Consideration. There does need to be something of value. Just understand that for deeds, consideration does not have to be money. It could be for love and affection. And we also don't have to state the amount of consideration. We just have to state that there was some. So we do need some type of consideration. I don't know why some list is left on. Sometimes it's left off. And so here's what we're talking about, right? Recordation of the deed is not a legal essential element, but the standard sales contract in many states in North Carolina require recordation of the deed to complete closing. So just be careful, okay? Be careful with the test question of where are we asking about valid? Are we asking about enforceable? Are we asking about, general practice? Because when we're talking about general practice, that's going to be like closing a real estate transaction. Yeah, you don't get the keys until it's recorded. But is the deed valid without recordation? Yeah. Remember the deeds, folks, there are a lot of questions on my test, I promise, about the deeds. And students get them wrong all the time. Most powerful, most form of warranties, most protections for the grantee, general warranty deed. Covenant of season, covenant against encumbrances, covenant against covenant of quiet enjoyment. All of these things, right? It's basically the bumper-to-bumper warranty. Promise that I'm conveying it to you. You can convey it to somebody else. There's no encumbrances except those that have been disclosed to you. Nobody can claim superior title to you. I promise it's good, clear title as far back as it goes, and if there's ever an issue, I'll fix it. That's a lot of promises. Is that conveying ownership any better than any other deed? No. Is it providing more protections for the grantee and more liability for the grantor? Yes, because there's more warranties there. The tier below that, special warranty deed. I'm giving you title. I promise I've not done anything to mess up the title so long as I've owned it. Anything before that? Nope, not saying. But as long as I've owned it, that's a special warranty deed, also called a limited warranty deed. Remember the bargain and sale deed right here says very similar to a quitclaim deed. This is where I think I own it, and if I do, I'm transferring ownership to you, right? So there's a suggestion that I have ownership. It's different from a quitclaim deed because a quitclaim deed says, I don't know if I own anything or not. But if I do, I'm quitting my claim to it. So quitclaim deeds are most commonly associated with curing title defects. Does it still transfer ownership? Yes. Of course, some of the other ones we talked about, correction deeds, just fixing typos, reconveyance deeds, which is the satisfaction of your mortgage or your deed of trust, trustee's deed, how we transfer for a foreclosure in a deed of trust or title theory state, sheriff's deed, how we transfer title in a judicial foreclosure in a lien theory state, deed of gift we talked about, transfer with little or no consideration. As I said, deeds do need consideration, but deed of gift would obviously not necessarily have to have it because you're saying it's a present, which people give presents for no reason. Remember title assurance. Don't confuse that with title insurance. Attorneys do title searches, give an opinion of title. Title insurance companies issue title insurance. Remember, title insurance is different than every other insurance. One-time premium paid at closing. There is a lender's policy and a borrower's policy. The borrower pays both. When would the lender's policy expire?
When the loan has been paid off.
There you go. Once the loan's paid off, the lender has no skin in the game anymore. They don't care. And so the buyer's policy would go on even after that. And remember, the other reason why it's weird compared to all other insurances is because it only deals with things in the past. It's not protecting you from future title issues, only things that they may have missed in the title search. And remember, your title insurance is not going to cover you if you didn't have a survey, if something would have been discovered during a survey. So right here, this is probably where we're going to spend the rest of the last 20 minutes here. God bless. Yeah, my brain hurts.
I know how we feel every day.
Yeah, I know. I think for me, like, I mean, it's good that I can remember all this crap without having to like go back and, like that's good. For me, I think it's just like my voice is vibrating my brain and I haven't stopped. So like, I mean, at least y'all aren't hearing my voice in your brains. You're just hearing it through your ears. So like, you at least got that going for you. It is drinking from a fire hose. Yeah, I'm very tired of talking. I need like 3 weeks off of teaching just to like be reinvigorated and like teach again. But unfortunately, I got 2 classes again tomorrow. And whatever. I feel like I hit my mouth. You know what, Nathan? What you feel like is you got hit by a car with 4 little old ladies going 35 and a 60. That's what you feel like. It's just a slow roll. They just start dragging you because they're only going 35 miles an hour. You're just getting dragged behind it. Get out of here. Look at that. Even when we're talking about getting hit by a bus, and then we still incorporate some study material. Whew. All right. So, this right here, okay? I want you to look. 16 items. That is huge. Huge. Real estate contracts and agency. This is such an important section. So in basic contract law, there is a crap ton of vocab. You got to know what a contract is, right? Enforceable set of promises between parties to do or not do something supported by legal consideration. It's a contract. Contracts can be express versus implied. Expressed, clearly stated. Implied, suggested by our actions. Are there plenty of implied contracts that are enforceable? Yes. Don't confuse this. Folks, are every contract question I'm going to ask you on the test about real estate? No. Are implied agreements allowable for agency in North Carolina? No. Are implied agreements allowable for sales contracts in North Carolina? No. But under basic contract law, are there implied agreements that are enforceable? Yes. Remember going out to eat at a restaurant. If you don't believe me, walk out. Order food, walk out. It's enforceable. It absolutely is. Bilateral, 2 promises. Unilateral, 1 promise. What was the most common type of unilateral I told you is testable from a real estate point of view?
Right to purchase.
Close.
Option to buy.
There you go. Let's go on the option to purchase. Option to purchase. So the reason why it's unilateral is because, hey, Karan, I think I want to buy your house. Would you be interested in selling it to me for $800,000? And you say, yeah. Okay, well, I'll give you a couple $1,000s if you give me 3 weeks to decide. 2 types of negotiations, right? There is this option period and the money with that. And then there's the what you're going to sell your house for. The reason why it's unilateral, you have promised to sell it for $800,000 if I decide to buy it. Have I promised to buy it? No. So let me think about it. So that is an option to purchase. It is unilateral. Most contracts are bilateral. Promise money for house. Bilateral. Okay, promise for a promise. And even an option and a due diligence period, which is also unilateral, becomes bilateral when you exercise your option to purchase. So now I say, Karan, I am going to buy it. Now I've promised to buy, he's promised to sell. We upgrade to a bilateral contract. Just like if I get past due diligence period. Folks, I'm not in breach as a buyer in North Carolina for terminating during due diligence. But if I get past due diligence, that means I've now promised to buy. And so if I terminate after due diligence, I'm in breach. So it upgrades to bilateral at a certain point. Executed. You tell me, what does executed mean under basic contract law?
Finished.
Finished. Completed. Donezo. Okay. The deed's been recorded. The money's been transferred. Finished. Executed. What about executory? What does that mean?
In progress.
In progress. We got a contract, but it's not closed yet. That's exactly right. Be very careful on the test because sometimes executed means signed. Signed would be a very important aspect of certain questions. Use context clues to help you just in case there's ever a question that's suggesting something signed. But if we're saying under basic contract law, executed is finished. Valid contains all the essential elements of a contract. Presumably enforceable, not guaranteed to be enforceable. What are the essential elements of a valid contract?
18, sober.
Legal capacity, 18 sane and sober.
Meeting of the minds.
Meeting of the minds, also called mutual agreement, mutuality of assent, reality of consent, a lot of names. What else? Consideration, absolutely. Lawful objective. There you go. Those 4 things. If a contract contains those 4 things, it's valid. And a valid contract is presumably enforceable. Why do I keep saying presumably?
Because there's exceptions.
Like?
I think you get a valid contract with if somebody was belligerently drunk or if it's a minor. Take that off.
Sure, yeah. That'd make it voidable. Somebody could get out of it. The other reason why, folks, is in North Carolina and a lot of other states, we have the statute of frauds. So what is not a part of those essential elements? Writing. But what is required to be in writing in North Carolina? Real estate sales contracts. So could we have a valid oral agreement to sell real property? Yes. Would it be enforceable in North Carolina? No, because North Carolina states it has to be in writing to be enforceable. Does that make sense? So valid contracts have the 4 essential elements presumably enforceable, but certain circumstances dictate that they may not be enforceable because it was an oral agreement when it was required to be a written agreement or something like that. What is the most testable example of void? Bar none. There's 2, but there's really 1 that is the most testable example of void. What would make a contract void?
Mental capacity.
Yes. You being declared mentally incompetent by the courts prior to signing. That's always void. Folks, if I give you a test question and I state, which of the following would not be a voidable contract? And I say somebody signing under duress. If I say somebody signing under the influence, if I say a minor signing, if I say somebody signing who's mentally incompetent, pick that one, because that's void. The other three are voidable. So I said, which of the following is not voidable? The void one. Mentally incompetent is void. What you got, Robert?
Absolutely nothing. You answered.
Got to be careful. Okay, voidable. Duress, mistake, fraud, misrepresentation, being a minor, being drunk as a skunk, high as a kite. All of these things are potentially voidable. But being declared mentally incompetent before you sign is void, and it always will be. Now, timing does matter. If you become mentally incompetent after you sign, that's different. If you get drunk after you sign, that's different. Of course, being for an illegal act would also be void because that lacks the essential elements. Shimon says, once you piece up the video, you can receive this. Probably. I mean, it requires me to like edit it and then like put it on YouTube, which, you know, takes a little bit, but probably. I'm gonna try my darndest. Here's the thing. I don't want to like be like absolutely, because then I'm gonna feel like a jerk if like I just get so busy and I can't do it. I'm gonna try. Text me and remind me. It shouldn't take me too long to edit this together and post it for you. Yeah. So remember too, from a national point of view, a lot of national resources, addenda and amendments are used interchangeably, but in North Carolina, we use them very different. Okay, addenda is a plural of addendum. An addendum is an add-on to a contract. So we have a lot of standard addenda that we can use to add on additional things that may be necessary to put in a contract, right? It's not in there, so we add it on. FHA, VA financing addendum, additional provisions addendum, backup contract addendum. So we can add in these addenda to make other pieces part of the contract. What is an amendment?
You don't add anything new, but you correct an existing laws.
Say that one more time.
You don't add anything new, you just make corrections to something existing.
Yes and no, because adding something would also be an amendment. So what I mean is, we've already got a contract. If we wanted to add a repair agreement in there, that is an amendment too, right? Making that part of it. So what an amendment is changing a legal document that's already in place. So if we've got a contract in place, what we would call an executory contract. Changing anything is called an amendment. If we're adding specific terms into it, at that point, it's called an amendment. If we're changing the closing date, that's also an amendment. So it could be, you know, adding something into it as well. But the difference is, an addendum, those are added on with the offer. Adding something after it's under contract is called an amendment. It's kind of one of those weird things. You just got to be careful. What is a contingency?
I can do this if I do this.
There you go. And I don't want to be penalized if I don't. Okay, it's like a get out of jail free card. I'm not going to do this if I can't do that. And I don't want to be penalized for it. So I'm not going to buy your house if I can't sell my house. And I don't want to be penalized for it. So you would not lose due diligence money, because that would mean you're getting penalized. Is this something that exists in contracts automatically?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, is a contingency something that automatically exists in all contracts?
Probably needs to be added in, I imagine.
Yes, it doesn't exist in contracts by default. Our 2T doesn't have it, and if you wanted to create a contingency, CYA, right? Contact an attorney. So let me tell you the million different ways that these questions can manifest, folks. You know, if we say, I don't know, Seth is under contract to buy Naya's house, but has this provision that states if he can't sell his house, he's not going to buy it. Which of the following would best describe this contract? And it's going to say executed, bilateral, unilateral, executory, executory with contingencies, or, you know, voidable, bilateral. And you've got to pick the best answer there. So if we're under contract, it's executory, but it's not done. So executory, but I have this get out of jail free card. So it's with contingencies. Best answer, an executory with contingencies. Does this make sense? So they've got so many different iterations of the way that they can ask you these questions. And you got to be able to identify all this vocab. Now, of course, the other big part of the contract formation, right, the meeting of the minds, this mutual agreement, starts as an offer and does not become a contract until it has been signed with no changes and communicated back to the offeror or the offeror's agent. Folks, remember, there has to be an agency relationship. If you were a seller subagent, who would have to be notified of the acceptance for it to be under contract?
Will you repeat that?
Say it again.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. If you were a seller subagent, who would have to be notified of the acceptance for it to be a contract?
The agent.
I am.
Yeah, there you go. Let's combine that. Mark said the customer being the buyer, right? If I'm a seller subagent, can I put in an offer on behalf of this buyer customer? Yes, but they're not my person. They're unrepresented. That's because I'm a seller subagent, which means not the buyer. They're not my person. So if I submit the offer, it goes to the listing agent takes it to the seller signs it, goes to the listing agent, comes back to me as a seller subagent. I also represent the seller. So it's not a contract yet. It would have to go to the buyer directly. It is to the offeror or the offeror's agent, but there has to be an agency relationship. The buyer doesn't have an agent. Yeah, seller subagent. Folks, that word seller subagent is very powerful. Because if I say this person's a seller subagent, that means the buyer's a customer. If I say that this seller subagent is assisting a buyer or customer, I may not even say the term seller subagent. This agent's assisting a buyer or customer. Well, who's the only other person you can represent? The seller. So you know you're a seller subagent. Which means you knowing that the contract's been signed is not a contract. You're not their agent, and they're the offeror. So you're going to have to be able to pinpoint contract formation. The second it moves from an offer to a contract. Any change is a counteroffer. It kills the original offer. So rejection kills an offer. Of course, destruction of the property kills an offer. Death of the offeror, death of the offeree kills an offer. All these different things. And when we're talking about communication, remember, we said communication can happen any which way, shape, and form. Text message, phone call, email, carrier pigeon, smoke signals, fax machine, snail mail. The only unique one there, snail mail, is considered delivered when it's put in the United States Postal Service possession or the mailbox. Sometimes tested as both. But it has to be mailed to the appropriate party, the offeror or the offeror's agent. Remember, we did an exercise on this where I gave you these different scenarios and you had to make sure that you understood, right? It's got to break that plane. It's got to get back to the offeror or the offeror's agent. And for every single one of these things, it's time-stamped. It's considered communicated when it's sent. Even if they haven't seen it. Emails have timestamps. Text messages have timestamps. Voicemails have timestamps. As long as it was sent to the right party, it's been communicated.